Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the series premiere of Reginald the Vampire. Great series premiere, a lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, to fix some misconceptions I had going into the show, I think it's because it's Jacob Batalon. The only thing I saw was the teaser trailer, and that was a little while ago. I never actually saw the official trailer, but my misconception was going into this, I thought Reginald was in high school, and maybe that was me bringing kind of like, Jacob Batalon. The thing I best know him for is, or I think a lot of people know him for, is Ned from the MCU, specifically the Spider-Man movies. Well, and I also know him from, Bloodfest, the movie he did from Rooster Teeth. So either way, that was the... So I think I just went into this thinking he was high school still, but it's like, no, I'm assuming he's in like his probably early to mid-20s or something like that, because he does drink at a bar with Maurice later on, so... I'm actually surprised how quickly things played out and how quick, like, we get introduced to Reginald's life, and I love that whole like montage. Well, not montage, but like he's giving that motivational speak at the beginning. And I love that he's talking to that guy. He's like, oh, well, what do I want? It's like for Sarah to know that you love her or something like that. And it's like, yes, that's what I want. And him repeating that quote over and over again from we found out it's from Henry Ford. You do what you've always done. You'll always get what you've always got. Which I love that line from Maurice, who said, oh yeah, remember that's also from the same guy who thought that Jews made jazz so that they could corrupt the country or something. And it's like, yeah, that's interesting. I was like, wait, what? To be fair, I don't know history that well. I just don't remember that ever popping up with the whole Henry Ford of it all. But am I too surprised? It's like, no, considering the time and how a lot of people felt a certain way back then, it shouldn't be too surprising. But it's just one of those things of like, oh yeah, there's always an ugly side of the history you never hear. You hear about, I've always heard about, like what Henry Ford did to automobiles, creating like, what was the first, he essentially made the first car. Was essentially what would eventually become the first like automobile. But I'm like, yeah, but it's like I've never heard anything talk about his like anti-Semitism. Once again, probably other people sadly shared that same sentiment at the time too. But still, it's just one of those interesting things about history and stuff like that. You always focus on the good that people did, not always the shitty things that they've done. Regardless, he also has to deal with. God, Todds end up being the worst. The only decent Todd I'm aware of, sci-fi wise, like specifically the channel, is Todd from The Magicians. He was a bit of a bumble. He was a bit of a screw up, but that Todd, I like that Todd. But like every other Todd is a douchebag. There's a douchebag stepfather Todd on The Boys, and now there's this Todd, which even Reginald was like, all right, dude, like eventually, like any fat jokes eventually just stop being funny or anything like that. So he's like, yeah, I'm so fat that the scale said like, oh, to be continued. And the guy's like, all right, I get it. And it's like, you're the one keep doing and that's the sad thing. Like assholes think they're so. I should also just say this show spoke to me on some level. Yes, if you don't know, I'm a fat dude, So, like, maybe on some level it kind of... But I know, like, Jacob Batalon has also, like, slimmed down quite a bit, too. So I also know that, too. But still, because apparently that's also... Because I kept wondering, like, is this based on something? Looking into it further and finally get an answer, it is based on a series of books called the Fat Vampire series. I'm like, okay, we'll get into that in a second, but... Yeah, like, there's a lot that kind of spoke, because, like, I've always been kind of like the nerdy loser, too, so, like, oh, hear my voice crack when I said that, too. It's like, oh, that's so befitting. But it's like, yeah, like, there's so much to Reginald's character. It's like, yeah, I know what it's like to secretly be in love with someone, and you're just like, you never take that chance, because you're like, no, I know my limitations, so I never want to, like, stray too far from that. Like, I get that. There's so much with this character I connect with. And him liking a girl and just not sure, like, what to do, meeting Maurice. And that's what I thought was so fascinating. It's like, well, our introduction to Maurice, he snapped on a guy. Maybe I think Maurice probably has a bit of a code. He probably picks assholes, because a person he ended up, like, like drinking from at the beginning of the episode was just some schmuck who kicked a woman out of his car and stuff, treated her like shit. So it seems like maybe Maurice's thing is like, hey, I go after douchebags, kind of a little bit of a Dexter thing. But he does, we didn't see, but I guess based on what he said, he just drank from the guy. He's like, yo, bounce, forget anything about it. Your typical classic vampire way of handling things. Also, I kept being like, why does that actor look so familiar? He looks, and I think part of me is like, he reminds me of the actor, I was blank on his name. Is it Jordan Fisher? He kind of reminds me of him a little. They look a little similar, especially their hairstyles. But I saw the name, I was like, Van Peebles. I was like, wait, are you one of Mario Van Peebles' kids? Totally is one of his kids. Also did not know he had that many children. It's beside the point, but I saw the name Van Peebles, and in retrospect, I was like, oh man, you look so much like your dad, it's ridiculous. I was like, that makes sense why you look so familiar. You're a Van Peebles. His name's Mandela Van Peebles, interestingly enough. But tangents and all that aside, I was like, oh man, that's crazy. But my point was that Maurice seemed like he's a rational enough dude. And the fact is he went out of his way to help Reginald. And I'm like, I thought that was interesting. He even told Reginald later, like, yeah, I was going to eat you. But it's like, why didn't you? It's like, well, because he's like, I'm a hopeless romantic. Well, I'm like, dude, this show is speaking to me on every volume. It's like, hey, I'm a bit of a hopeless romantic. So I'm a little bit of Maurice, but I'm also kind of like, you're lovable loser like Reginald, which in no shape or form am I considering myself lovable. That was me joking. I'm not. I don't even have the confidence to ever call myself lovable. My point is, so it's just like this show kind of speaks to me on so many volumes on just that, just on a character level like that. But it's because I guess he saw like, right, you're in love, and I want to give that a chance. Like that. The fact is, because I was like, why didn't you just like, why are you taking such an interest in Reginald? You didn't just like pop in once to help him. You popped up again, like, hey, like meet me up at this bar. We'll run over things like an hour or so before your date with Sarah, because he wants to help him. I was like, yo, I'm looking out for you. I was like, that's actually pretty dope of him. I'm like, what made you? Why is that? And I was like, do you see so much of yourself in Reginald? I think. It might also be the thing of like, right, you see someone that's a little, in a metaphorical sense, downtrodden, and you want to help them out. It's like you always root for the little guy, because maybe at one point, well, definitely at one point in time, Maurice was the little guy to some extent. There's my voice go cracking again. Jeez. Either way, glamoring, he's able, it's called, they consider it glamoring, but when I think of glamoring, I think of like, disguising yourself, glamour, that type of thing, kind of like, from, the Wolf Among Us, that fairy tale story, as well as, what was the other thing? Grimm, the NBC show. That's what I think of when I think glamour. Compulsion is the word I will usually use, because that's like Vampire Diaries. I don't know if True Blood used that specific word too. Maybe they did. I think that's a typical vampiric word to use kind of when you're mind controlling someone. But getting him to ask her out, and it works. And Todd's like, oh, are you available on Saturday? She's like, no, Todd. I'm like, yeah, you're nasty. He's like, oh, just kind of had to ask. I was like, oh, you're such a douche, Todd. But sadly for Reginald, didn't work out, didn't even get to enjoy his date, because lo and behold, Maurice gets into it with these other vampires. He was kind of summoned because I guess he's been wilding, doing his own thing. Sadly, Reginald got caught in the middle of it. Two of the vamps, they ate him, left him for dead. Maurice was like, you know what, bump that, killed one of them, no hesitation. It's like, I need your permission. I wonder, is it just like it only works if you get consent? Or is it just kind of like is it like a magical vampiric thing where it's like, you can't actually do it without permission, just like, you have to be welcomed in? I'm curious what the rules about that are like in this. I'd assume that's applicable. That's your typical vampire rule, but I'm curious like how that really works. Because I think in like the Vampire Diaries specifically, if you're not invited in, a literal magical barrier like stops you from entering. Like you kind of get pushed back or whatever, and you can be uninvited too, can't you? Or am I thinking of something else? Once again, when you're in a new show with some supernatural stuff to it, you just want to always know the rules, because once again, vampire rules, there's a general consensus across most things, but a lot of things do their own thing. This one in particular we'll get to in a second, but I'm curious, like, how that would work. Like, could you actually push through without being invited in someone's place? But then, like, oh, you start burning from it, and then, like, if you leave, you're good. Who knows? But, he got permission regardless and brought Reginald back, and Reginald was kind of excited and is like, wait, I'm a vampire? This can't be. And he took it in stride, but then he tries his super speed, and then Maurice broke down like how it works. Basically, vampirism isn't like the magical, like, oh my god, you're so crazy powerful, OP, like most vampire stuff. It's like, whatever you were as a human, you were more enhanced. You're not a super enhanced, you're enhanced. He's like, if you were pretty fast as a human, you're going to be damn fast as a vampire, but it's not going to be anything crazy. And it's like, whatever you were as a human is what's going to apply as a vampire. And because of that, every person is different. You're coming into this with a different situation, different body type, and that affects like your circumstances, your constitution as a vampire. It's like, right, certain aspects of us have been adjusted. That's why we're able to heal faster. But generally speaking, our organs are the same. Because like Reginald's like, why am I breathing and why am I sweating? It's like, to be fair, it's like, because I was like, you can see their breath. Because some vampire stuff is kind of like, no, like you're technically not breathing air because you're not alive. It's like, no, every other aspect of our bodies are exactly the same. And that's kind of the problem. It's like, because you are, a big, he's like, go ahead, say fat. I'm not afraid of it. He's like, all right, because you're a fat vampire, yeah. For one, the general society of the vampires aren't going to like you. And it's like, oh, so cool. I mean, I guess it also makes sense. There's a hierarchy in vampires. Like, even vampires have cliques. It's like, oh, there's almost like I don't know if the books were aiming for this commentary, because I guess it's almost supposed to be like what are vampires typically, whether it's your Twilights or whether it's your True Bloods. It's typically like, especially like Twilight, your Vampire Diaries, is like, oh, the young, hot and sexy vampires. And it's like, yeah, Reginald doesn't typically fit the traditional, what is traditionally considered beautiful or handsome or yada, yada, yada. So I think it's almost supposed to be like a rebellion or commentary against that, and just in a very satirical comedic way, but also being like very real. Like, what if like kind of an average person, like someone on a bigger side or kind of just a regular person, did just become a vampire? It's like, oh no, the rules don't apply like you say, but the vampire world still treats it like that. Like, oh, if you were an unpopular person as a human, probably gonna be unpopular as a vampire, because they kind of don't shine upon like, oh, you're seen as less than. And for Reginald, it's like, cool, I became undead and I'm still gonna have to deal with the same shit I had to deal with in my undead life too. Also, man, everything uses like the blood tears thing, because I'm watching Interview with the Vampire as well, and so I know that comes up in that. I think it comes up in Let the Right One In. Once again, I've not seen the movie in such a long time. The series is right around the corner. It's about to start. But also, like, because I definitely remember it from True Blood, but that was the only thing. But I'm like, oh, so that's potentially 4 things that use the vampires crying blood thing. Because I'm like, I don't think nothing in the Vampire Diaries did that, unless it was kind of like a magical thing that ended up hurting you and making your eyes bleed. But no, typically, like, yeah, because vampires have there's been people who've cried in that show and it's never been tears of blood. So it's like, yeah, just interesting. Like, basically 3 shows almost about to run simultaneously are going to have that element. And once again, maybe that's a more traditional vampire thing that I'm just not remembering off the top of my head. Either way, poor Reginald trying to get adjusted to things, though. He tries to go to work because he wanted to talk to Sarah. Be like, oh, is everything, like, wanted to apologize for not making their date. Obviously, the sunlight thing. I love because he stood there for a hot second before getting burned. Obviously, and I love Maurice. It's like, nah, you'll live forever. I mean, as long as you don't take like a stake to the heart and you don't, end up getting stuck in sunlight. But he's like, that's super, super unlikely to happen. So I was like, I love that line. But Reginald's freaking out because he's around so many people, and being around people, like, blood starts, he sees the veins in their neck. It's like, yeah, he sees people as food. And it's like, right, you don't eat, you just start seeing everyone around you like that. And it's like, right, you don't want Sarah to become food, so you need to figure something out. You owe her more than an apology. So he breaks up with her, but it's like, wait, we've never been dating. It's like, we have to end this. Like, well, nothing's really started between us, but he's like, I can't, it was a mistake asking you out. It's like, and it legitimately broke my heart. And, you know, because once again, I feel so much like Reginald that it's like, man, that sucked. You know, it's just like, I've never been in that obviously your situation is very extenuating, but it's still like, you know, I think it just sucks all around. And Maurice sitting down with you, it's like, as your like maker, I feel what you feel. I know exactly where you are. He's like, yeah, the moment I became your maker, I knew everything there is about you. I guess it's like, right, once I bit into, makes you wonder, is that typical across anything? Like when you drink someone's blood, will you know everything about them? Or is it just purely by becoming their maker, you learn everything about them? Like he got his history and like, we are fully connected. So that sire maker bond, I'm always curious. I'm curious to see how they handle it in comparison to some, because I don't think it doesn't run that deep in the Vampire Diaries universe, but obviously they did their whole circumstances with that. But you know, I'll leave that at that. So I'm curious to really see the full scale of like that sire/maker bond in this universe. And surprisingly enough, we learned about Maurice's past. So he's not that old of a vampire. He's only, because at first I was like, oh, the 70s, that was 30 years ago. I'm like, why the hell am I still thinking like the 70s were 30 years ago when in fact it was 50 fucking years ago? I'm like, oh man, I was like, I don't know why that's why I was like, oh. It's like, it's 50, not 30. I don't know why, like, that's so weird that my brain adjusts like that. Because it just feels like, oh, the 70s, that wasn't that long ago. It's like, 50 years ago was a while ago. But it also shows you that Maurice is on a very young vampire. But it seemed like he might have been part of, like, I would assume, like, the posters and everything. I didn't ever catch the full posters, but it seemed like it was kind of like a little bit of a Black Panther situation he had going on. And Angela, which the actress who plays Angela, I had to look up her name. It's Savannah Baisley. I also had to look this up too, Zoe in Cerilostate, so another sci-fi connection. Just because it's been a while, and so, which I was excited to know, because I guess I hadn't looked into it in a while, so I didn't know about Cerilostate situation, but it is coming back for a new season sometime next year. Either way, so I was like, oh man, you're Angela. And I was thinking like, oh, maybe you're going to be in a smaller capacity because of that. But it could just be you are a character that doesn't pop up that often. Or maybe just the schedule is just that wide open that you could do this while potentially a season 2 of Cerilostate. Maybe Cerilostate at the time was still in between. Regardless, tangents and all that. Well, because I'm sure like the final episodes of Winona Earp and Cerilostate probably like coincided to some extent. Once again, tangents and all that aside. But she must be on the much older side because she referenced that, you know, it's like, right, I've been through some revolutions, like, so it's like, right. She makes it sound like she's been around a while, just kind of seeing, like, whether it's, like, old-timey stuff, whether she's, like, super old, or whether it's just, like, a few revolutions here and there that she's been through. But she made Maurice into what he is, but he has a very complicated relationship with Angela. He's like, he doesn't want to talk about it and says that she wasn't there to help him out. In fact, he figured it out on his own. And Reginald was like, hey, I want you to be my mentor. And my friend is like, I kind of have this thing about friendship, but it's like, please. And it's like, fine, I'll be there for you. So I like that. Like I said, Maurice overall just seems like such a good guy. We'll have to find out if he's got kind of a terrible nature to him or not. You know, what are the stipulations of why the book's kind of getting thrown at him? Specifically, it being Angela, who's kind of top boss, who's kind of, I wonder why. I guess he's kind of going rogue, and because she cares about him, she's trying to rein him back in, or I don't know, maybe he just doesn't like the way she's handled stuff. I mean, he even says, like, I guess it was kind of like almost a Spartan thing of, I'm going to throw you to the wolves, figure it out on your own, because that's the only way you're going to grow. Maybe he just doesn't enjoy the system that she's kind of built. We don't know if she's like the top boss, or like vampires are in society are like broken up into different factions. Is she one faction amongst others? We don't really know the full hierarchy of things, but they want to keep Reginald's circumstances quiet. But she was kind of upset the moment it's like, wait, you killed Maurice's friend? It's like, yeah, why? It was like, I was hungry. And it's like, I guess she did that specifically because it's like, oh, this is the reason why Maurice responded the way he did is because you killed someone important to him. It's like, you upset Maurice, you upset me, which is understandable too, because I didn't think about it while I was watching the episode, but what Maurice said is when it comes to a maker and their, the person that they sired, you know exactly what they're feeling at any point in time. So she probably felt his anger and sadness about what you did to his friend. So she ended up killing her. Didn't just stake her, full blown ripped her heart out. Which I also love. I didn't even think about it at the time, but because he is from the 70s, it's probably, well, he was mainly, probably like that was kind of his 60s, 70s was his main era. So the stake he had was like a fro comb, but he sharpened it the end like a shiv. So it was almost like, oh, it feels almost very befitting that it's like how very like disco era of you to some extent to have that be your sort of stake / shiv. So just thought that was interesting. So but Reginald is slowly finding out about what he's capable of, because it seems like he naturally had a good head on his shoulder. So it is a thing of he was fairly smart, but it seems like as a vampire he's even smarter, or at the very least he's kind of got, the only person I know for sure that does that, like super reading, I know like the Flash, and I think the Kryptonian. So I think Superman and Supergirl can do it. Because I think Superman kind of has like an eidetic memory, not necessarily photographic. I can think there is a difference between the two. But Reginald kind of has that going on. I also thought it was kind of an interesting thing. Like, of course, like, he references Megan Thee Stallion, which I'm like, of course you would. She is like one of the most popular musicians out there right now. So, of course. But then I'm also like, well, that's fascinating because, once, as I mentioned before, Jacob Batalon, I know as Ned from the MCU, which Megan Thee Stallion made her debut in the MCU as herself in She-Hulk. So it's almost like synergy to some extent. I'm reading way too much into it, but I couldn't help but think that the moment that popped up in the episode. But either way. But you also have Sarah showing up because it isn't just a one-way street. Sarah likes him and he likes her, but he thought it was like a one-way thing. But she's like, no, we're going to talk this out. Like, because, when you're looking at me, you think it's just you looking at me. No, I'm looking back at you as well, which I'm like, oh, that's sweet. Because even Maurice was trying to compliment him, like, oh, you're a handsome dude too, But as Reginald kind of plays like, yes, size does matter, which even Maurice is like, oh, that's funny, just because it's like the double entendre of what that could mean, obviously in his respective case, but still. Also, I kept wondering why that actress who plays Sarah seems so familiar. Her name is Emily Hain, and looking through her IMDb, apparently she was in Deadpool. I haven't seen that movie in years, so I don't remember who she was. Apparently she was also in The 100. I'm like, I don't know how big of a role that was, but the thing I think I recognize her from the most is Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. She played Elspeth. I remember that character. I'm like, oh yeah, that's her. I'm like, okay, I definitely remember you now. But also on The Magicians, I saw a picture of like one of the characters she played. She was one of the fairies in The Magicians. I was like, oh, interesting. I think she might have been like the main fairy they first interacted with to some extent. Maybe I'm misremembering. Either way, I just thought that was so interesting. I was like, you look so familiar, and I just couldn't place it. So The Magician's why that gets interesting, connecting that sci-fi wise. But regardless, I just thought this was kind of like a cute, kind of fun, nice start to the series, and I'm very interested to see where things kind of go from here, and just see what other shenanigans and craziness ensues as everything plays out. This is just kind of like the starting ground to just get you started and like, yeah, just everything's happening all at once. Quickly introduce you to Reginald, kind of give you an idea of who he is, both with his, living life and his undead life. Either way, I'm interested to see where the next episode takes us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.